Do you need help?
Welcome to the channel, lovelies. Please like and subscribe. Park Seo-jin did not sit in public parks, and yet there he was, on a wooden bench in the middle of a quiet city park. No phone in his hand, no meeting to rush to, no empire to manage. Just a man sitting with something invisible pressing down on him so hard it had bent his shoulders forward without him even noticing. His guard stood 30 feet away, rigid and watchful, scanning every face that passed. Nobody came near him. Nobody ever did. That was not an accident. That was the life he had built. A life where fear kept everything and everyone at a safe distance. Then he heard them. Tiny footsteps, uneven, unhurried, completely unbothered. He looked up. A little girl, 4 years old at most, that was walking straight toward him. She had brown skin and thick natural hair pulled into 2 puffs, and she was clutching a stuffed rabbit so worn it had lost one of its button eyes. She stopped right in front of him, tilted her head to one side and looked at his face the way children do when they haven't learned yet that staring is rude. Then she asked him, in the softest, most serious little voice he had ever heard, "Do you need help?" His guards took a step forward. Seo-jin raised one hand, almost without thinking, and they stopped. He stared at the child. In 30 years of running one of the most feared criminal networks in the world, not one person, not a partner, not an enemy, not a subordinate, had ever asked him that question. Not one. And here was this tiny girl clutching a half-blind rabbit, asking it like it was the most natural thing in the world. She didn't wait for his permission. She climbed up onto the bench beside him, settled herself, and studied his face with enormous dark eyes. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He wasn't sure he remembered how. "You know," she continued, "my mommy says, very matter-of-factly, that when grown-ups look this sad, it means something hurts inside." He looked at her. "I'm not sad." She looked back at him. "Yes, you are. Lying to a child doesn't help." He had no answer for that. A 4-year-old had just called his bluff, and the terrifying thing was, she wasn't wrong. "Why would you want to help a stranger?" he asked finally. She shrugged one small shoulder. "Because nobody helped my daddy either." Something moved in his chest. He didn't know what to do with it, so he kept his face still and his voice even. "What happened to your daddy?" "He died," she said simply. Not with drama, not with tears, the way children say impossible things. Just the truth, sitting there in the open air. "He was in a place far away and then he got hurt and he didn't come back. Mommy cried for a really long time," she paused, "but she doesn't cry anymore because she has to be strong for me." Seo-jin said nothing. "Mommy works 2 jobs, the girl continued, swinging her feet off the edge of the bench. "She's always tired. But she still makes my lunch every morning and puts a little drawing in the box." She held up her rabbit. "She made me this. His name is Bun." She considered him seriously. Sad people should help each other. That's just what you do. A crime boss, diagnosed and sentenced by a preschooler with a one-eyed rabbit. He felt it before he understood it, something old and buried shifting under the surface of him. He hadn't felt guilt in a very long time. He had worked hard to stop feeling it. But sitting on this bench, listening to this child talk about her tired mother and her dead father, it came back. Slow and suffocating like smoke filling a room. "What's your name?" he asked. "Jada," she said. "What's yours?" "Seo-jin." She tried it. "Seo-jin." She seemed satisfied. Then she pointed at him with one small finger. "You have to come back tomorrow. I'll be here after my nap. We can be friends, and then you won't be sad anymore." Before he could answer, before he could explain that men like him did not make promises to small children in public parks, she had already climbed down from the bench. She looked back at him once, completely certain, completely unafraid, and then ran toward a woman standing near the park entrance who was already looking for her. He watched the woman reach down and take Jada's hand when the little girl got closer, Then he watched them walk away. He heard it later. Her last name. His assistant had followed up a background check he'd ordered the moment the little girl walked away. The report came through on the ride home. Akeem. Jada. Akeem. That name did not move through him like a memory. It moved through him like a blade. He sat in the back of his car and read the file his assistant had pulled, and the further he read, the stiller he became. Daquan Akeem, convicted 4 years ago for a crime he did not commit. A crime that Seo Jin's own network had carried out, and when the investigation got too close, an innocent man had been identified. Threatened, we and given a choice. Take the blame, or your family pays the price. Daquan Akeem had a wife who was 3 months pregnant. He took the blame. He was killed in prison, 4 months before his scheduled release. Seo Jin had known the case never sat right. He had buried that feeling the way he buried everything. Under work, under power, under the noise of running an empire. He had not thought about Daquan Akeem in years. He was thinking about him now. The little girl who climbed onto his bench and asked if he needed help. The little girl whose mother made her rabbit and packed her lunch every morning. The little girl whose daddy died in a place far away. She was Daquan Akeem's daughter. And that night, sitting alone in the silence of his penthouse, Park Seo Jin faced the 2 choices he had avoided his entire adult life. Walk away like he always had, or stay. Back in her small, warm apartment across the city, Jada was telling her mother about the sad man she met at the park. Her mother listened, smoothed her hair, and told her she was proud of her. Always be kind to strangers, baby. Always offer help if you can. Jada nodded seriously, already planning what she would say to him tomorrow. What she did not know, what her mother did not know, was that the sad man was sitting in the dark right now, reading a file about their lives, and that whatever he decided next would change everything. The next morning, he got into his car. He told his driver the address of the park, and he still had not decided what kind of man he was going to be. Camila Akeem was already there when he arrived. She was sitting on a bench near the fountain, head bent over her phone, looking like a woman who had stolen 15 minutes of peace before the next thing came for her. Jada spotted Seo Jin before he even reached the gate. She broke into a full sprint across the grass, rabbit bouncing in her hand, and crashed to a stop in front of him. "You came back," she announced, as though she had never doubted it for a second. "I came back," he said. She grabbed his hand, just took it without asking, and pulled him across the park toward her mother. He could have stopped her. He didn't. He let a 4-year-old lead him toward the woman whose husband he had destroyed, and every step felt like something he deserved. "Mama," Jada announced proudly, "this is my friend." He's the sad man." Camila looked up from her phone. Her eyes moved over him quickly, the kind of fast, careful assessment a woman learns to make when she's been alone long enough. She stood and extended her hand with a warm, tired smile. "I'm Camila." He looked at her hand, then at her face. She had the kind of eyes that had seen too much and still chose to stay open. He felt the guilt hit him so hard and so fast he nearly stepped back. He shook her hand, said something brief and cold that he couldn't remember the moment it left his mouth. Made an excuse, got into his car and drove away. He heard Jada's voice behind him. That wasn't nice, before the door closed. He did not sleep that night. He told himself to end it, to pull his guards back, disappear from their lives, to leave a payment in an anonymous account and call his debt settled. He told himself that was the clean thing, the safe thing, the thing that protected everyone. He opened his laptop and pulled up the account details. He did not make the transfer. He closed the laptop, sat in the dark. And the next morning he was back at the park. Jada was waiting with both hands on her hips. "You left?" she said. "That wasn't nice." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry. Say sorry to Mama too." He looked at Camila, who was watching him with guarded, curious eyes. "I apologize," he said. "I was rude." Camila studied him for a moment, then she nodded. "Okay." It started there. Slowly, cautiously, with Jada as the bridge between them, he began showing up. Not announcing himself, not forcing anything, just showing up. He framed it as friendship, and he found small ways to help. Offering to pick Jada up from daycare one afternoon when Camila's shift ran late, insisting with quiet firmness that it was no trouble. Camila was guarded, proud, deeply uncomfortable with anything that felt like charity. But her daughter trusted this man with the ease of someone who has never been taught to fear, and that trust, irrational as it was, meant something to her. "I don't know anything about you," she told him one evening, the three of them sitting on the park bench as the sky went orange. "I know," he said. "That's not exactly reassuring. I know that too." She looked at him sideways. Jada was asleep against his arm, bun tucked under her chin. Camila watched her daughter's face, soft and trusting, and then looked back at the man she couldn't figure out. She didn't know what he was weaving, but whatever it was, it had already pulled her in further than she'd planned. Weeks passed. The park visits stretched into evenings, the evenings stretched into dinner invitations, cautious at first, then warmer. Jada escalated from calling him her friend to calling him her best friend. And somewhere along the way, the distinction stopped feeling like just a child's game. He learned everything about her world sitting at Camila's kitchen table. He learned that Daquan had been Camila's high school sweetheart, that she had believed in him completely, right up until the arrest, that the trial had cracked something in that belief she had never fully rebuilt, because you can love someone and still feel abandoned by them. You can grieve someone and still be furious at them. How you can visit a grave and not know whether you're there to mourn or to argue. "I know that sounds terrible," Camila said one night, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, voice low so Jada wouldn't hear from the next room. "He was my husband. He was her father. But he made choices and I was the one left standing in the wreckage." She looked down at the table. "I grieved him and I resented him at the same time. I still do. Some nights I'm not even sure which one wins." Seojin sat across from her and listened to every word. But he never told her the truth. He told himself he was protecting her. That the truth was a grenade, pull the pin, and it doesn't just destroy him. It destroys everything she'd rebuilt, everything Jada had, every careful wall Camila had constructed between the past and the present. He told himself silence was mercy. But something else was happening underneath that story he was telling himself. The guilt that had driven him here was getting quieter. The visits were starting to feel less like penance and more like something he wanted. Jada's laughter, enormous and sudden and completely without reservation, was filling something in him he hadn't noticed was hollow. And Camila, complicated, guarded, exhausted, beautiful Camila, was starting to look at him the way people look at something they're afraid to want. Neither of them named it. But it was there, growing in the spaces between her kitchen and his silence, and a little girl who had decided they both belonged to her. He should have left then, when it was still possible to leave cleanly. He knew it. He sat in his car outside her apartment building one night and knew it with complete clarity. And he went back the next morning and the next until his guilt completely faded away, or was buried so deep he never realized it was there anymore. The call came in the middle of a Wednesday. His assistant's voice was flat and careful. It got that way when the news was bad. Seojin's enemies, a rival network that had been circling his operation for months, had identified Camila and Jada. They had connected the dots. The crime boss's regular visits to a park, the woman and the child. It wasn't hard mathematics. And now they were going to use the equation. He ended the call and sat completely still for 4 seconds. Then he moved. He assigned 4 of his best men to Camila's building without telling her. He started varying his routes to her apartment, showing up at different times, or watching the street before he buzzed her door. He asked questions that sounded casual. "Which garage do you park in at the hospital? And does Jada's daycare have a side entrance?" And noted every answer. He became careful in a way that looked from the outside, like devotion. Camila noticed. Why do you always look at the street before you come in? She asked one evening, arms crossed, watching him from the kitchen doorway. Habit, he said. From what? Old habits. She looked at him for a long moment. You're not going to tell me, are you? Tell you what? Whatever it is you're not telling me. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. I'm not stupid, Seo-jin. I notice things. You're always watching. Your phone goes off and your whole face changes for half a second before you put it away. And sometimes when Jada and I are walking somewhere, I feel like... She stopped. It sounds crazy. Tell me. Like we're being watched, but then I tell myself I'm being paranoid. She searched his face. Am I being paranoid? He looked at her. No. She went very still. What does that mean? He opened his mouth, and then his phone rang, the emergency line. His man's voice came through in 3 short words. He was already moving before he finished the sentence. A few days later, it happened. It was 11 p.m. Camila's second shift ended at 10:45. She had parked on level 3 of the hospital's parking garage, the way she always did, and she was walking to her car when they came. 2 men moving fast, cutting off her exit before she even understood what was happening. She had time to scream once before the sound of running footsteps came from behind her, and then suddenly there were 4 other men around her car, and the 2 who'd cornered her were backing away, and someone was saying in a low, urgent voice, "Get in the car, Mom! Get in the car right now!" And she didn't know whose side anyone was on, so she just ran. She was shaking so hard she could barely hold her phone when Seo-jin arrived. She was standing by the exit, arms wrapped around herself, and when she saw him walk through the door, something in her face collapsed. "What is happening to me?" she said. Her voice was barely sound. "What is happening to my life?" He took her home. She called to check on Jada, still asleep. The neighbour who'd stayed over hadn't heard anything. She sat on her couch and he sat across from her, and she looked at him with eyes that were past frightened and into something colder and more demanding. "Tell me," she said, "all of it, right now." He looked at her face. He looked at Jada's bedroom door. He thought about every version of this conversation he had rehearsed in the back of his car over the past months. Every careful, partial truth, every protective edit. And then, sitting in her living room at midnight, he ran out of road. "My name is Park Seo-jin," he said. "I run a criminal network, international. I have been doing it for almost 30 years. The men tonight were sent by my enemies because they've connected you and Jada to me, and they want to use you to get to me." Camila did not move. 4 years ago, he continued. His voice was steady, just the way things are right before they collapse. "My organization carried out a crime in this city. When the investigation got close, we needed someone to take the blame. We identified your husband. We told him that if he didn't confess and accept the charges, his family would be hurt. His wife was pregnant." He stopped. "You were pregnant." The silence in the room was total. "Daquan wasn't guilty," he said. "He never was. He went to prison to protect you, to protect Jada. He died in there 4 months before his release, and I always knew the case wasn't clean. But I buried it. I moved on. Until Jada sat down next to me on a bench and asked me if I needed help, and I found out her last name and I..." "Stop." Camila's voice came out strange, flat. "Stop talking." He stopped. She stood up slowly. She stood in the middle of her living room. The living room where she had cooked for this man, where her daughter had fallen asleep on his shoulder, where she had let herself feel something she swore she was done feeling. And she looked at him. "You destroyed my family," she said, very quietly. "You threatened my husband. You sent him to prison. You took him away from me when I was carrying his child. He died in there." Her voice didn't shake. It was worse than shaking. "And then you sat across from me at my kitchen table and let me talk about how I resented him. You let me say I was angry at him for leaving me. You sat there and you knew. You knew exactly why he left, and you said nothing. He said nothing now either, because there was nothing to say. You didn't come here because you wanted to make it right, she said. You came here because you felt guilty. This was never about us, it was about you. It was always about you. She walked to her front door and opened it. Her hand on the handle was completely steady. Get out of my house. Camila, get out. He walked past her. He heard the door close behind him. He heard the lock turn. He stood in the hallway for a moment, then walked to his car. Inside, Camila stood with her back against the door. She slid down slowly until she was sitting on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, in the apartment she had built from the rubble of a life someone else had demolished. She thought about Daquan, not with resentment, for the first time in years, but with a grief so clean and so full it felt new. She thought about her daughter asleep in the next room. Who had looked at a crime boss with no fear at all and offered him her tiny hand. She sat on that floor and cried, really cried, the kind she'd been holding back for years. And she didn't stop until exhaustion took her and she fell asleep right there, her cheek against the cold wood. The morning after the worst night of her life, Camila Akeem woke up on her kitchen floor with a stuffed rabbit in her lap and her 4-year-old daughter sitting beside her, warm and quiet and completely unbothered. Children are often unbothered by things they have decided to simply accept. Jada did not ask what happened. She did not ask why Mama slept on the floor. She just sat there in her pajamas with her feet tucked under her, one hand resting on Camila's knee, as if her only job in the world was to be present. And for a long moment, and that was enough. That was the only thing that was enough. Camila looked at her daughter's face, then she got up, went to the kitchen, and made breakfast. Because that was the only thing she knew how to do when everything else had collapsed. She kept the small things standing, but the small things were getting harder to hold. She couldn't sleep. Not really. She would close her eyes and the dinner table would come back, his face across from hers, the way he listened, the way she had let herself talk about Daquan with more honesty than she had ever used with anyone. She had told this man things she hadn't told her own mother. She had sat in her kitchen and described the specific shape of her grief, the anger underneath the grief, the guilt underneath the anger. And he had sat there and taken it all in and said nothing. Known everything, said nothing. She would open her eyes and stare at the ceiling, and the rage would come back, clean and total. Then something else would come behind it, something worse than rage, the image of Daquan. Not the way she had been remembering him for years, the man who made a choice that broke their family, the man she loved and resented in equal measure. But Daquan the way he actually was, a man who was threatened, a man who looked at the woman carrying his child and chose to absorb the damage himself rather than let it reach her. A man who went to prison innocent and died there, 4 months from coming home, protecting a family from a man who would later sit at their kitchen table. She grieved him differently now. It was a cleaner grief, no resentment mixed in. And that made it heavier, not lighter. Because there was nothing to be angry at Daquan for anymore. There was only loss. Weeks passed. Seo-jin did not call. He had handled the enemies who stood as a threat to him. He did not come to the park. Did not send anyone she could see. He had simply vanished from their lives the way she had told him to, and she told herself every morning that this was what she wanted. She told herself that over coffee, over Jada's school drop-off, over the long double shifts that left her feet aching and her mind too tired to protect itself from its own thoughts. Then one night, 3 weeks after everything, Jada appeared in her bedroom doorway. Camila was sitting up in bed with the lamp on and a book open in her lap that she hadn't read a single page of. She looked up. "Baby, it's late." "I know," Jada said. She padded across the room and climbed up onto the bed with the particular determination of a child who has decided something. She settled herself next to her mother, pulled Bun into her lap, and looked at Camila's face for a long moment. "You're still hurting," she said. Camila set the book down. "I'm okay." "Mama." Jada's voice was patient in the way that felt somehow much older than 4. "You don't have to say that to me." Camila looked at her daughter, at the serious, watchful eyes, at the small face that had been reading her accurately since the day she was born. She felt the back of her throat tighten. "I'm trying to be okay," she said. Jada nodded slowly. She looked down at Bun. She smoothed one of his worn ears. Then she said carefully, "I think the sad man did something really bad." Camila went still. "Yes, he did. Is that why you're sad now too?" "That's part of it." Jada was quiet for a moment. Then she looked up. "Mama," she said, "you told me forgiveness is the only way to find peace, remember? When I was mad at Chloe for breaking my crayon, you said being mad forever just hurts the person who's mad." She paused. "Remember?" The silence that followed was long enough to fill the whole room. Camila stared at her daughter. This small, impossible person who had walked up to the most dangerous man in the city with nothing but a worn rabbit and a question. This child who had apparently been listening to every single thing her mother ever said and filing it away for exactly the right moment. She didn't speak for a long time. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. "When did you get so smart?" Jada shrugged. "Oh, I just listen." Camila pulled her daughter close, pressed her lips to the top of her head, and finally, in the dark, in the quiet, with a 4-year-old who had just delivered the most devastating sermon she had ever received, she let herself cry. Not the frantic, collapsing tears of the night on the floor. Something slower, something that felt, underneath the pain of it, like the beginning of release. She did not forgive that night. That was not how it worked, and she knew it. Forgiveness was not a door you walked through once. It was a hallway, long and poorly lit, and you had to keep choosing to move forward even when every instinct told you to stop. But that night was the first night she chose to enter it. The weeks that followed were for her, entirely, deliberately for her. She called her friend Diane, who she hadn't spoken to properly in over a year. Too busy, too tired, too folded into survival to maintain the friendships that had once kept her sane. Diane picked up on the second ring and talked for an hour without needing a single explanation. Camila laughed twice during that call. Real laughter, and it startled her both times. She signed up for a Saturday morning yoga class at the community centre. The first week she spent the entire session staring at the ceiling during the resting pose, too wound up to actually rest. The second week she fell asleep. The instructor told her afterward that was perfectly normal and also exactly what she needed. She went back the third week. And the fourth. Thus she took Jada to the gardens on a Sunday and let her daughter run between the flower beds, naming every colour she could see with the focused intensity of someone conducting important research. She bought them both mango sorbet from the cart near the exit. They sat on the grass and ate it in the sun, and Camila thought, This is what I've been forgetting. This is what I should have been protecting all along. The shift in her was not dramatic. It was the kind of shift that happens in the body before the mind catches up. A loosening, a slowing down, a gradual reduction in the constant low-frequency tension she had been carrying so long she'd stopped noticing it was there. She started sleeping through the night. She started tasting her food again. She started looking at Jada's face without the cloud of everything else sitting between them. And then came the harder work. She went to see Daquan's grave on a Tuesday afternoon, alone. She stood there for a long time with her hands in her coat pockets, looking at his name carved in the stone. She thought about who he was, not the symbol he had become, not the wound, but the actual man. The one who saved his lunch money to buy her flowers when they were 17. The one who sang badly in the car and knew it and sang louder anyway. The one who put his hand on her stomach the night they found out she was pregnant and cried, quietly, in a way she had never seen him cry before. The one who was threatened by a man with an empire and a phone call and no conscience, and who looked at his pregnant wife and chose to take the fall so she would be safe. She had spent years resenting him for leaving. She understood now that leaving was the one thing he did entirely for her. "I'm sorry," she said, standing at his grave. "I'm sorry I didn't know. I'm sorry I was angry at you." Her voice broke on the next part and she let it break. "I'm so sorry they took you from us. And I want you to know, she's extraordinary. She is so extraordinary. She got all the best parts of you." She stood there until she felt emptied out in the way that is actually a form of fullness. Then she walked back to her car. The anger at Seo-jin did not disappear after that. It was still there, present, legitimate, hers, but it had changed shape. It was no longer something that pressed against the inside of her chest looking for a way out. It had become something she could hold at arm's length and examine. And when she examined it honestly, she found something she hadn't expected sitting underneath it. She found that she understood, in a specific and painful way, how someone could make a terrible decision and then live with the distance between who they were and who they should have been for so long that the distance itself became the only thing they knew. She didn't excuse it. She would never excuse it. But she understood it, the way you understand a thing when you've done your own inventory and found your own wreckage. And her daughter's voice, soft, certain, arriving in her bedroom in the middle of the night, kept coming back to her. Forgiveness is the only way to find peace. One morning she woke up and the decision was simply there. Not dramatic, not announced, just there, the way some decisions arrive after being assembled quietly in the background while you were busy doing other things. She was going to go to him. Not for him. Not to give him anything he had earned or deserved, but because she had learned, in the most brutal way possible, that carrying something that heavy only breaks the person carrying it. And she had Jada to raise. She had a life to build. She had yoga on Saturdays and Diane's phone calls and mango sorbet in the sun, and she refused to drag the weight of Park Seo-jin's guilt into all of that. She found his office building through a contact. She stood outside her closet that morning for a long time, and then she put on the blue dress, the one she wore when she needed to feel like herself. She did her hair. She put on earrings. She looked at her reflection and nodded once. Then she looked at Jada. "Get dressed, baby. We're going somewhere." Jada looked up from her cereal. "Where?" "To see the sad man." Jada put her spoon down very carefully. She looked at her mother's face. Then she slid off her chair and went to get dressed without another word, with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that something important was happening and their job was to be ready for it. The building was the kind that announced its own power without trying. The lobby staff looked at Camila and Jada with careful, assessing eyes. Camila gave her name, said she was there to see Park Seo-jin, said it in the tone that meant she was not asking. They were shown upstairs. The office was on the top floor. He was standing near his desk when the doors opened, already looking up, and when he saw them, when he saw Camila in the blue dress and Jada holding bun with both hands, something moved across his face that he could not arrange quickly enough to hide. He looked like a man who had been waiting for a verdict and had not yet decided whether he wanted to hear it. He said nothing. Camila walked into the center of the room and stood there. She did not sit. She had not come to be comfortable. "I'm not here because you deserve this," she said. Her voice was even, clear. "I want you to understand that first. You don't deserve anything from me. What you did to my husband, to my family. There is no version of an apology that covers it. There is no amount of quiet protection or anonymous help that settles that account. I need you to know I know that." He looked at her. He did not attempt to speak. "But I came because I'm not going to carry this for the rest of my life," she continued. "I have a daughter to raise. I have a life to build, and I refuse to let what you did to us be the thing that defines what comes next for us." She paused. So I forgive you. Not because you've earned it, not because it lets you off the hook, but because it's the right thing to do, and because I am not the kind of woman who lets someone else's worst act become the ceiling on her own life. Seo-jin stood very still. His hands were at his sides, the city stretched out behind him, enormous and indifferent. I hope you change, Camila said. Whatever you need to do to make it right, keep doing it. Not for me, not because it changes anything between us, but because it's who you should have been all along. Become that person. For whatever time you have left, become that person. She held his gaze for one long moment, then she stepped back, and Jada walked forward. She crossed the room in her small, unhurried way, bun held in both hands in front of her. She stopped a few feet from him and looked up at his face with those enormous, fearless eyes. He looked down at her. I think, she said, in the careful voice she used when she was saying something she had thought about very hard, that you needed help that day. In the park. She paused. And also forgiveness. So I'm giving you both. She held out Bun to him. He looked at the rabbit, worn and one-eyed, missing patches of fur, carrying 4 years of being loved. And he did not move for a moment. Then he reached down and took it. He had to look away. He turned slightly toward the window, toward the city. The stuffed rabbit was a child's version of a blessing, but a symbol of reminder and constant punishment to him. When he turned back, Jada had already returned to her mother's side. Camila took her daughter's hand. She looked at Seo-jin one final time, not with hatred, not with warmth, but with the clean and level-headed gaze of a woman who has put something down and does not intend to pick it up again. Then she turned and she walked out. Jada walked beside her, steps matching her mother's, head straight, shoulders back. Two people who had just set down something they were never meant to carry, walking out into the light like it already belonged to them. The elevator doors closed. Seo-jin stood alone in his office, holding a one-eyed stuffed rabbit in both hands, looking at the city below him. The same city he had run for 30 years. The same city where a man named Akwana Kim had gone to prison for him and died there. The same city where a 4-year-old girl had walked across a park and sat down next to him without fear and changed everything he thought he understood about what a person could still become. He sat down, for the first time in a very long time, not under the weight of something, just sat. Time moved the way it does when people choose to let it, forward, unevenly, with small good things appearing in the spaces between the hard ones. Camila did not look for him. She had said what she came to say, and she meant every word of it, including the part about not looking back. Her life, the life she was rebuilding with her own hands and her own choices, did not have a space in it for the likes of Park Seo-jin. It had spaces shaped like Saturday yoga and Diane's phone calls and Jada's school projects and long Sunday afternoons in the gardens. She filled those spaces with care and attention and the quiet, fierce intentionality of a woman who has survived something enormous and decided to use the survival as a foundation rather than a ceiling. She did notice, in a distant and deliberate way that she chose not to examine too closely, that certain things had changed around her. The leak in the kitchen ceiling, the one she had been waiting 3 months for the landlord to fix, was repaired one morning while she was at work, and nobody could tell her clearly who had sent the maintenance crew. A letter arrived confirming a scholarship grant for Jada's school fees, from a foundation whose name she did not recognize. The street outside their building, which had always felt slightly unsafe after dark, seemed quieter, more settled. She noted these things, filed them, and moved forward. She was not naive. She knew what they meant. She chose to accept them without gratitude and without guilt, as partial payment on a debt she had not agreed to carry, being honoured in the only way left available to the person who owed it. Seo-jin kept his word. Every line of it. He did not contact them. He did not appear at the park or at her door or at the edges of her life in any visible way. He honored the distance completely, with the same absolute commitment he had once brought to building an empire of fear, except that what he was building now was different, quieter. It required a different kind of discipline, and he applied it without exception. His businesses were different now. The long, careful, deliberately unglamorous process of legitimizing everything he had built on illegitimate foundations was underway. Not complete, not clean, probably never entirely clean, but moving. He had lawyers he met with on Mondays, a therapist he saw on Tuesdays, board meetings for the charitable foundation his accountant had helped him structure on Thursdays. The work was slow and sometimes it felt absurd. A man with his history, sitting in a therapist's office talking about guilt, but he went every week. He sat in the chair, and he said the true thing instead of the managed one. He kept going. The empire he had built on fear was being taken apart from the inside, carefully, the way you dismantle something dangerous, making sure nothing collapses on anyone standing nearby. He still sat in the park sometimes, but a different park, not hoping, not watching, just sitting with the city around him and the particular kind of quiet that comes when you have stopped running from something and started slowly, becoming something else instead. He still had Bun. He kept the rabbit on his desk, not hidden, not displayed, just there, sitting at the corner where he could see it from his chair. One eye, worn ears, the specific irreplaceable shabbiness of something that had been deeply and completely loved. On the days when the work felt too slow, or when the weight of everything that could not be undone pressed back in, he would look at it. And he would hear, as clearly as if she were sitting next to him on the bench right now, a small voice asking him the most important question anyone had ever asked him. Do you need help? He had needed it. He had needed it for 30 years before she walked across that grass and sat down beside him. And she had given it to him, freely, without fear, without condition, the same way she gave him the rabbit, the same way her mother had stood in his office and handed him the one thing he had no right to expect from either of them. Forgiveness. He understood now what she had been trying to give him that day in the park. It wasn't company. It wasn't a child's simple kindness. It was a direction, a way out of the life he had been living, offered by the last person in the world who should have been the one to offer it. He just needed time to understand it. Then he looked up at the park, imagining the path where the tiny footsteps had come from, the bench where everything began. And, for the first time in as long as he could remember, the looking back did not hurt. It just reminded him of where he was supposed to go. There was a lot of work to be done, but he is sure to make conscious steps and efforts to fix his wrong moving forward. And somewhere in the quiet of that new life, if you asked him the same question a little girl once did, do you need help? He would finally know how to answer. And that's it, lovelies. If this story moved you, it's because somewhere underneath all the drama, it's asking a question we all have to answer eventually. How do we face the weight of what we've done, and is it ever too late to become someone different? Jada didn't change Seo-jin because she was extraordinary. She changed him because she was willing to see him when everyone else had learned not to look. If you've made it this far, you already have that same instinct in you. So subscribe, because every story we tell on this channel is built on that same belief. That the most powerful thing a human being can do is choose to be better, even when nobody is watching, even when it costs everything.